with a note that just read, "Thought these might help. See full." Ed did his best not to examine the surge of pleasure he got providing for the Omega. It was just being neighborly, helping Steed out, nothing more. It wasn't like he was cutting the Omega. He wasn't leaving behind scented gifts, however. Did Steed have snacks? Sweets? Omegas love sweets.
Bel C is back with 2 more kinky fics for your listening pleasure. One is a Stizzy fic, and one is an Omegaverse Gentlebeard. Get your pearls ready because these fics are spicy. By the way, if you'd ever like to narrate anything for this podcast, just find a fic you like, ask the author's permission, record it, and then send in the audio file to ourflagmeansfanfiction@gmail.com, and I'll put it up on the podcast. Now let's dive in. First up is Late Blooms by Kalen's Phantom. Steed is a newly presenting Omega experiencing his first heat. His neighbor Ed has a long-standing crush on him. Let's see what happens when Steed asks Ed for some pillows.
Chapter 1. Night Blooming Serious. We have an image. It is a tweet with a meme. The tweet is from Steedy B at Trusty Steed. It reads, "What the hell do you do when you present at 46? Asking for me." The meme reads, "I haven't studied. I'm not prepared." Steed Bonnet had spent his entire life as a beta. He had never felt like he was missing anything not presenting either as an alpha or an omega. True, his life wasn't perfect. His marriage to another beta had been little more than an arrangement, but he loved his pups with his whole heart and could never regret them. His divorce from Mary had been a blessing in disguise, as they were far better friends than spouses, and she truly loved Dog. It had been the start of a year of changes for him. New apartment? Check. He'd even found an old Victorian house that had been converted into apartments that was full of charm and beautiful woodwork. New job? Double check. He adored working for a library. It was his passion, and he didn't miss the stuffy position at his father's company. New friendships? Many. He had a little crew of his own now that he went out with on weekends. He felt as though he were finally in control of his own life. Until he'd gotten sick. Well, sick was apparently a misnomer. He'd spent 3 days miserably feverish and uncontrollably alternating between cramps and nausea. On the 4th day, he'd finally dragged himself out of his bed, even though every instinct screamed for him to get back into it, and gone to see the doctor. He only realized something was wrong when he left his apartment and drowned in so many scents he could barely think. He'd felt overwhelmed to the point Lucius had to come and pick him up. "You smell sweet," Lucius had announced the moment Steed had gotten into the passenger seat and buckled up. "Thank you," Steed had gritted out while trying not to crinkle his nose at the strong scent of peppermint and chocolate. "No, Steed, the fuck, you smell sweet." And what the hell was Steed supposed to do with that information? Aren't you a beta? Over an hour later, Steed had been sitting on stupid crinkly paper in an exam room, staring at the brochure entitled Late Presentations, What You Need to Know, and a change that he had never prepared for. He was 46! Who the hell heard of a 46-year-old beta presenting at his age? It was uncommon, especially after 30, but after a round of blood work and an exam, he had a diagnosis. He hadn't been sick for 3 days. His body had been slamming into high gear, producing hormones and pheromones and all sorts of damned moans that was part and parcel of being an omega. Steed was, understandably, grumpy about the situation, and it didn't improve as several more days of being miserable later, he realized the worst wasn't even over. "How the hell do you expect me to act?" Steed snapped irritably as Lucius perched on the edge of the desk. "This happens when you're in your teens, not when you're my age." "Oh, come on. It's not that bad," The Omega crinkled his nose playfully. I mean, think about it. You skipped out that whole awkward school phase. Oh my god, the amount of trouble I got for scenting office was epic. Yes, thank you. How comforting, Steed muttered as he flipped a page in the book he'd secreted away from the health and sciences section. Also, why are you even here? You get a week off for your heat and you're smelling way too sweet. Lucius took a larger sniff. If I smelled like that, Pete wouldn't let me out of the house. Lucius, Steed hissed, and he felt his cheeks heat, looking around for the stupid patches that he picked up. I'll take it off. I will. Heat. It wasn't like being in heat and rut were secrets. They were commonplace in the lives of alphas and omegas. He'd just not paid much attention to it. He knew Lucius took a week off every year for it and came back looking pleased, sometimes with lurid hickeys on his neck, but still could do without that, thank you very much. Not that he could stop it now, but he was now on suppressants, so once his first heat was over, that would be it. Did you pick up any toys? Ooh, or we can go shopping together. I have one. It's got a knot and like 11 vibration settings. Don't you have work to do? Steve burst out desperately, shifting the subject to something other than sex toys. This is a workplace. I'm your assistant. I'm assisting. Come on, you'd have something. Lucius slipped off the desk and grinned. Besides, you're scheduled off anyway, so... We are not going to a sex store. Steed snapped, and it was too loud because he saw a few people glancing over at him. It ended up being a losing battle because once Lucius got an idea in his head, he wasn't content to let it go. Steed eventually let himself be hauled off with so much embarrassment that he thought he might implode. It wasn't as if he'd need toys. Going into heat was just a bodily function, and he was old enough to control himself. He'd probably just be a bit uncomfortable for a few days, no worse than when he'd first started presenting. You got the birth control, right? Like you're taking it? Lucius asked as Steed was nearly shoved into a discreet shop that advertised itself as the Omega's Nest. Yes, Roach prescribed them, he grimaced. They're mixed into the suppressants he gave me. I told him I didn't need anything but the suppressants, but he insisted. Good move. What if you want to hire an alpha for your heat? Lucius waggled his brows suggestively. I have the numbers for some great services. I think I'll survive. Steed rolled his eyes and nearly choked as they walked into the building proper. Good Lord, it's full of knots. Steed knew he was bright crimson, but the shop was filled with every sort of toy imaginable, and some he had lacked the ability to imagine. Lucius seemed to be entirely at home, which led to an entire afternoon of being dragged around to check out toys he might like. Toys! Steed wasn't a novice when it came to pleasuring himself, but how many vibrating settings did one need? And who on earth needed a toy with interchangeable knots? By the time they left, he had a little black bag with a single toy, despite Lucius's protestations that he needed a variety. It was almost a relief when he was able to retreat back to his apartment and away from Lucius's attempts to talk him into hiring an alpha to service him. They were all acting like he was going to be some desperate hormone-riddled ball of horniness. Ridiculous. He managed to get into the safety of his apartment with his little bag safely and sighed. He twitched his nose, trying to get used to the sweet lavender citrus scent that now clung to him. It was strongest in his bedroom, soothing a restless urge that had been growing in the back of his mind. He tossed his bag on the bed and flopped down to press his hands to his eyes with a groan. Why did this have to happen now? He muttered, and tried to ignore the desire to rock up his blankets to burrow beneath him. This was going to be fine. It would. It was just going to be a couple of days of discomfort, and then Steed could go back to normal. Now we have a tweet from Steedy B at Trusty Steed. Haha at Lucy Lawless. Thank you for the copy of your presentation and you. Very funny. I'm a grown man. I can deal with going into heat. It's not like I'm a hormonal teenager. How bad can it be? From Lucius at Lucy Lawless. He's got a meme. The first frame reads, "I'm gonna tell him." The second frame reads, "Don't you dare." Reply from Steedy B at Trusty Steed. "Tell me what?" Steed pattered around his house restlessly but kept returning to his bedroom and frowned at his bed. It was so early that it was nearly still dark out, but his attention was fixed on his bed. He'd woken up feeling restless and ready to crawl out of his skin, but he'd also woken up to a text from Lucius that he wasn't allowed to come to work. It was joined in the group chat by the rest of the crew telling him to stay home. The fact that one of them had actually taken a picture of the employee handbook that referred to mandatory time off for heat and ruts had made him grit his teeth. He would have rather distracted himself at his desk surrounded by his familiar library rather than burning up with restless energy. Was this how it felt? Was he already in heat? How did you even know you were in heat? "Oh, babe, you'll know. Trust me. Just relax into it," Lucius had told him on the phone when Steed had called him at 7 a.m. to protest being told to stay home. "It's gonna be great." Great. Being locked up like a grounded child because suddenly I'm on Omega. He gritted his teeth and tugged at the blanket on his bed nervously. He'd woken up rubbing his cheek and neck into his pillows, wanting more of his scent on them. The dormant scent glands had begun to produce subtle oils that had left his pillows and blankets richly scented with lavender citrus scents and the addition of something sweeter. Yet, his bed wasn't right. It made him unhappily restless, but unable to walk away from it. He wanted to be close to it. "God, am I nesting?" he thought and pinched the bridge of his nose as he tried to figure out what to do. It was all about the pillows. He'd already dragged out every blanket he had, but there were only 4 pillows and he wanted there to be enough to nestle in with them. There were the pillows from the pup's rooms, but that wasn't an option. He stormed off to the living room and snagged off the decorative throw pillows in an attempt to placate the one for mole. It was better, but not great. He dropped down onto the bed and glanced at the time. It was getting later in the morning and he could go to the store to get some more. The urge wasn't quieting, but growing worse by the moment. He needed his nest to be perfect, comfortable. If it felt this urgent now, how much worse would it get? "Steed, I swear to God, if you're fucking calling me to come to work, I am driving over there and padlocking your front door," Lucius answered the call. "Oh no, I had a question." Steed felt a wave of embarrassment. "How many pillows do you have in your nest?" Dunno, 8 or 9? "Shit, do you not have a bunch of pillows?" Lucius made a noise. "Ugh, of course you don't. Damn, I keep forgetting you might not be ready for this." "I have 4, and the throw pillows, and I guess I need more." Steed sighed. "Why is this a thing? Why are pillows needed?" "Hey, easy babe, it's fine. Listen, I get off work at 5 and I'll hit the store. Send me a list of anything else you want, okay?" Lucius's voice became sympathetic but offered no insight into why he'd need a bunch of pillows. He got off the phone, but even knowing more pillows were coming didn't stop the urge to fix his nest now. He tugged at his shirt collar, loosening the top button, uncomfortable as he felt a warm flush of heat creep up his cheeks. No store, no Lucius, 4 hours. And not enough pillows. Apparently, those were Omega problems today. We have a tweet from CDB at Trusty Steed. "It'd be weird to ask the neighbor for more pillows, wouldn't it? It's either that or the store." Ed wasn't an early riser, even at the best of times. A late night, thanks to insomnia, had hardly made him one, so the sound of someone at his door at just after 9 in the morning had him growling. He snarled that he was coming as he dragged himself out of his bed, barely managing to shrug on a shirt as he stumbled to the door. He half expected it to be Izzy at the door, ready to chew him out for skipping out at work. Instead, he opened it to his next-door neighbor, looking both delicious and frazzled. Hello, I'm Edward. The words came out in a tumble as Ed blinked owlishly. I'm not sure if you remember me. I'm Stede Bonnet from next door. He knew who Stede Bonnet was. They'd been neighbours for the last year, after all. But mostly they saw each other in the stairwell, or in passing. Beto was normally well put together, impeccably dressed and cheerful. But today he looked like he'd just come in from a jog. His shirt was dishevelled and unbuttoned at the collar, his cheeks reddened and his hair fell in a swoop half over his eyes. Hazel eyes that looked a bit too bright, almost feverish. And shit, he was still handsome looking, more than handsome. The strong arms were in short sleeves to show the muscled biceps and scattering of freckles. The unbuttoned collar of his shirt showed a glimpse of his chest and a dusting of hair that Ed probably shouldn't have fixed on, but he wasn't exactly able to look away. Maybe when you moved in, Ed offered and ran his fingers through his hair, watching the hazel eyes track his hand, and the cheeks went even redder. Interesting. It's just a crush. Be normal. He probably needs a cup of sugar, Ed warned himself firmly. I'm afraid this is going to be awkward. Fuck, he knows. Ed nearly wilted at the first words because he knew Stede Bonnet another way entirely. The old converted Victorian house had thin walls, which had sometimes been a problem, but he'd found that his new neighbour came with one amazing benefit. Stede told his pup stories every night while in bed, and every night Ed could listen to them while falling asleep. He was fun and did silly voices, and sometimes Ed had to strain to listen, but nothing put him to sleep like listening to Stede reading. Had Stede figured out how thin the walls were? Was it going to be weird to say he'd spent months listening on story time? Do you have any pillows? Stede burst out, and Ed snapped his attention back up. Pillows? He asked slowly, suddenly realizing that a sweet scent was clinging to Stede. Lavender and sweet lemon. Something delicious beneath it, mouth-watering even. Omega. You need pillows. Fuck, he's an Omega. How did I not know he was an Omega? Ed thought, trying to remember why he hadn't noticed scent patches on Stede in the past. I thought he was a beta. In fact, pretty fucking sure he was. Yes, God, that sounds so weird. I don't have enough. Stede wrung his hands. And I really need more pillows, if that makes sense. Yeah, guess you would. The sweetness was there, an alluring mix of pheromones that was the unmistakable hint of an Omega nearing heat. But, I got some in the cupboard, but they'd kind of smell like me, mate. Every Omega Ed had ever known collected pillows and blankets like a squirrel with nuts. They all had piles of them tucked away for when they went into heat and needed the extra comfort. He'd never heard of one asking a strange fucking alpha to borrow them. Stede fidgeted again, shifting and crossing his arms over his broad chest while Ed did his damnedest to ignore the rich, sweet scent. He wanted to step forward and tuck his nose right into the Omega's neck, drink it down, roll it over his tongue, and then haul Stede into his bed. That's a problem? Stede asked, and blinked a few times before leaning forward into Ed's space. Oh, holy fuck, what the fucking hell? Ed barely had time to drag two thoughts together before the Omega tipped his head down and sniffed delicately. They weren't touching close, but within a few inches, as Ed felt an exhalation of warm breath against his neck before Stede jerked back. The Omega's eyes were wide, nearly frantic looking as he stepped back and swallowed. Ed watched the bobbing throat and had to dig his fingers into his palm to not do anything. Sorry, you don't smell bad. And if you had a few extra, I promise I'll wash and give them back. I really need them. Stede's voice was huskier, holding a faint vibration as if he were going to purr. Ed didn't know Stede well, but he knew enough to tell that he wasn't acting normal even for an Omega in heat. He looked almost lost. The frenetic edge of energy had his fingers drumming against his arm while he kept glancing over at his own door. Just how close to his heat was he? And was he even out of his nest? He had 1,000 fucking questions, but he didn't think it'd be smart to ask them while his sleep-muddled brain was still trying to tell him he should go in and sense the Omega properly. "Hey mates, no problem. Let me just grab him for you," Ed offered and took a step back. It didn't take long to find the pillows he kept for visitors, though they were in scent-proof bags, so he knew they'd have some of his own scent on them. Ed firmly ignored the part of him delighted in the Omega dragging his scent into the nest while he was in heat. That was in his business, and clearly the guy was going through it. He'd be a good neighbor. "Here, don't worry about returning them, yeah? Might have some throw pillows too," he offered as Steed gathered all 3 pillows in against his chest in an endearing fashion. "Oh no, these are perfect. Thank you. I'll definitely return them. I don't mean to be." Steed huffed out a breath. "I'm sorry. I'm just having a morning of it." "Yeah? Want to talk about it?" Ed offered, because he was neighborly. Not because he wanted an excuse to talk to the cute blonde Omega more. Definitely just being neighborly. No, I really need to be getting back, but thank you," Steed chirped and flushed, his head tipped down as if he were subtly sniffing the pillows. "I've never done this before, and it's a bit overwhelming." The last was cold over his shoulder as he merrily shuffled off with his bounty while Ed gave a slow blink. The hell? Steed was at least his age. How could he have not done this before? Or maybe he meant having a heat while freshly being divorced? Ed had 1,000 questions running around his head as he watched the Omega disappear into his apartment before he closed his door. Steed isn't a common name. Wonder if I can find him online, he thought idly, suddenly feeling a lot more awake than he had been. Now we have a tweet from Rather Be Jeff at Born on a Beach. "Okay, hate being woken up, but flush-faced cute Omega asking to borrow pillows. 10/10 wake up. Would recommend." Then we have another tweet from Steedy B at Trusty Steed. "Why did I sniff him? What the hell is wrong with me, and where are my manners?" He did smell amazing though. Reply from Lucius at Lucy Lawless. "Who smelled amazing? Steed, Elizabeth Bonnet, answer your phone right now." Steed felt as though his clothes were too much. It was almost like being sunburnt, except it wasn't pain. It was just searing heat flushing over him while he arranged his borrowed pillows. He'd found cases for them, tucking them away, and did his best not to think about how they smelled like his neighbor, like rich clove and leather, musk that made him shift in his nest and burrow his nose against one pillow. "What the hell is wrong with me?" He jerked his head back and sat up, scooting a little and rubbed his face. He'd heard that alphas and omegas had senses that were more attuned to scent, but he assumed it just meant they could smell better. He hadn't realized that his sense of smell could be dialed to 11, and some harmless scent might make his body thrum with the desire for more. He could only imagine what Ed must think of him after he'd acted like an idiot and sniffed him. He'd nearly burrowed his nose into the slender neck. It wasn't as if he wasn't attracted to his neighbor. When he'd moved in, he'd seen the lovely man with his long black and silver hair and had been tongue-tied. He dressed in leather, endlessly cool-looking, but his eyes were soft and kind every time Steed saw him. His tattoos might make him look edgy, but they were also beautiful, like the graceful snake tattoo on his arm. Steed had never felt the need to sniff a man's neck he was attracted to. He thought he had a handle on this, but he was starting to feel doubts creeping in. He stared down at his phone and sighed a little bit as he saw Lucius's respond to his tweet. There were more responses, and he flicked through them briefly with a flush. Sometimes he forgot that he had so many followers, which probably meant he should temper what he was posting. But at the same time, why shouldn't he document what was going on? He was shocked so many people enjoyed listening to him read bedtime stories, but apparently it was good ASMR per Lucius's assessment. It was something he'd done as his pups had gotten older and moved away from listening to stories. He enjoyed reading stories before bed, so he'd begun to make it a habit and gradually gathered a decent following. Some of the suggestions seemed helpful, and he scrolled through them before he realized he was sweating. Steve dragged his shirt off. The cool kiss of air on his skin was a relief, and he let out a breathy sigh. He was flushed with pink going all the way down his chest, and he threw his shirt to one side. He reached for the button on his pants and flushed a bit when he realized that they were tinted. He wasn't even sure when he'd gotten half hot, but there was no denying it. This was fine. He had control, plenty of control. He was panting when he finally dragged his pants off, whining a little as he had to pull them down past his tinted underwear. Just that fabric was a torment to his swelling cock, but he ignored it with all the willpower he had in him. He had heard about heats. He knew there were states of increased arousal. This was just proof of it. It didn't mean he had to do something about it. A shower would help, wouldn't it? At least that might cool him down a bit and clear his head from wanting to burrow his head down into the borrowed pillow. The alpha had smelled so good, and he was just down the hall. Maybe if he went back, asked for the throw pillows from the couch, and then the alpha would offer to let him come in and get them, and then Ed would step in close, pull him in, and nope! Shower right now, he said to the empty room, and dragged himself from his bed. His nest. He turned the water to lukewarm as he dragged his underwear off with a hiss. His cock was flushed red, throbbing and heavy as it sprang free, but that wasn't what caused him to freeze. There was wetness that was clinging to his boxers, and he swallowed before moving his hand backwards nervously. His fingers traced down to find his hole, already slick with arousal, and he hissed out as the pad of his finger brushed the opening. Oh God, that was really new. It's just slick, just a byproduct of going into heat. It's why you were miserable for days while your body went through changes, he reminded himself and forced his hand away. He ignored the faint ache that was burning through his belly, twisting with a heat that was beginning to grow hard to ignore. He knew the biology of it, the way certain parts of him were primed for an alpha, that his muscles were loosening inside for a knot. The reality was raw meat that was growing as he stepped into the shower with a whine. His cock throbbed, and he shifted backwards as he ducked his head down while he tried to calm the urge to wrap a hand around his cock. Steed wasn't immune to feeling aroused. What he wasn't used to was how he twitched with desire to push his fingers inside of himself. He felt empty, the muscles achingly sensitive, and the water didn't do anything to clear his head. He was having trouble thinking past waves of need and the sensitive press of his hands as he washed himself. Everything felt so good. Was he supposed to feel like this? Was it normal? Steed swallowed and skated a hand down his heavy cock, feeling it twitch in response. It'd be just so easy to wrap his hand around himself, to ease some of the need. It'd be even easier to slide a finger into his slick hole to feel his body stretching open. The thought made him pant shallowly, and he slammed his eyes shut before he turned the water as cold as it could go. Tweet from Rather Be Jeff at Born on a Beach. He has a YouTube channel where he reads bedtime stories in cute little glasses. Why have I been listening through the wall? Ed found Steed Bonnet on YouTube first and spent the next 2 hours going through videos of the Omega reading nightly bedtime stories to anybody who found him. They were all children's stories for the most part, but there were a few where he'd done more modern classics over the course of several days. In each one, he was snuggled into a bed, wearing fancy-looking PJs and propped against a headboard, while the camera was angled to catch his mobile face, and he did the voices and silly faces. A glance at the comments showed that a lot of the people listening were full fucking adults like Ed, and he could see why. It was soothing, even through the wall where the words were muffled. He fell asleep quickly on nights Steed was reading stories. If he'd realized he could have had full videos, he probably wouldn't have dragged his feet so long in properly talking to the guy. And that wasn't all. There were a whole slew of videos about the maddest things. You should be at fucking work, a mental voice that sounded like Izzy told him as he watched a full 20-minute video about little model ships that Steed had put together. He had a crush on the Omega. He'd known that since like month 2 of him moving in, but Ed had long since settled into a place that didn't involve relationships. He knew what he was, who he was. He wasn't the sort of alpha anyone would want to date. Fuck. The only reason he had friends was because he was good at his job. So he'd sort of tucked the crush away, but now it was parading around on video showing off a model pirate ship and gesturing wildly in excitement as he explained how pirates pirated. It was somewhere near the 2-hour mark and newer videos when he found out why he'd assumed Steed was a beta. Because he had been a beta until last week. He'd heard about people presenting late in life. There were whole debates in the scientific community on why it happened that ranged from hormonal imbalances to trauma response to a mating drive when presented with an appropriate mate. The thing was, late presentations were normally 20-year-olds, not someone in their 40s, which made him wince. Fuck. No wonder he looks so unhinged. He's never had a heat, never done any of this. I thought as the video showed a more subdued Steed. I'm sorry, we'll miss story hour for a bit, but I assure you I'll still be active on my socials. Links are below if you'd like to come along this journey with me. He glanced through the comments and felt a low growl rumble in his throat as he saw a plethora of alphas that had made comments about being willing to come over for personal story time. As if a refined gentleman like Steed would want some idiot with a screen name Naughty by Nature 69. The fact that Steed had very politely responded to every comment declining soothed Ed, but only slightly, until he moved on to see what else he could find. Ed clicked one of the links and tried to imagine being in his fucking 40s and going through his first rut. It'd been bad enough at 15. What would it be like after a lifetime of not knowing how to process sense or gather things to make a proper dent for himself? Still wouldn't have all the trappings of a little nest for himself either. Omegas gathered that shit over years and years, or were giving it for their presentations when they were pups, and he'd been so distraught that he'd come to a near stranger's house to ask for more, a strange alpha store. That was what finally got him to close his laptop and leave the couch, not the phone calls from Izzy that had been buzzing through. It didn't take him long to toss on clothes and leave his apartment. And if he stopped, briefly, outside of Steed's store and felt a twitchy urge to knock on the door, well, that was just because he knew the Omega was probably overwhelmed, right? Of course that was why. It took him nearly an hour to get to a store and find a section devoted to nesting material. He had no idea what the fuck sort of things Steed might like, but all his videos had been filled with fine material right down to his pajamas, so he made a guess. He picked out pillows that were faux fur and others that were satiny and silky, making sure to keep the colors neutral. By the time he was done, he had a mountain of them to take back to the apartment. This time, when he stopped outside of Steed's apartment, he did take in a deeper breath. Like most places, the apartments had sealed doors that made sure scents didn't travel, but it didn't stop him from trying. He placed the pillows in their sealed bags outside the door carefully with a note that just read, "Thought these might help. See full." Ed did his best not to examine the surge of pleasure he got providing for the Omega. It was just being neighborly, helping Steed out, nothing more. It wasn't like he was cutting the Omega. He wasn't leaving behind scented gifts, however. Did Steed have snacks? Sweets? Omegas loved sweet things. A distraction from the line of thought came with his phone ringing for the 6th time in 10 minutes. "What?" he snarled as he yanked it out. "I'm not fucking dealing with this shit today. Get your ass down here. We've got the meeting with Honeygold," Izzy snapped. "This is your damn mess and merger." "Fuck," Ed sighed and glanced at the door again before backing away. Yeah, fine. I'll be down in half an hour. Maybe he'd pick up a little bag of sweet things on the way home. He knocked on the door and bolted away before Steve could answer it, retreating to his own apartment just as he heard his neighbor's door open. When he left a short while later, the pillows had all been taken inside, which made him smile to himself. He hoped Steed used them to make a perfect nest for himself. Now we have some text messages from Lucius. "Please tell me you're seeing Twitter. You are blowing up. Steed, This is awful. Why won't the AC go colder? Lucius. Aw, you're getting into it, huh? Steed. How do you do this every year? Lucius. Multiple partners, lots of water, and like so many toys. Steed. Maybe I need another cold shower. Lucius. Or, hear me out, a knot. Then you have Steed's search history on Google. He searched how to get through your first heat without an alpha, how to tell you're fully in heat, how much slick is too much, how to cool down from first heat, late presentation first heat, how big are average knots, how do Omega do this and survive? End of chapter.
That was Late Blooms by Callan's Phantom, read by Bel C. Next up is So Sweet When You Obey by Spooky Scary Genderfuck. It was written for the Kinktober 2022 prompt Power Imbalance. It's a Stizzy fic, and that's all I'll say about that. Enjoy!
Izzy, be a darling and give me a hand with these ropes, Steed called to the shorter men from across the deck. His request was met with a sharp glare thrown over Izzy's shoulder, but no verbal response. Steed sighed. He'd hoped that since Izzy had been occasionally joining in his romantic escapades with Ed, their relationship outside the bedroom would become more cordial and less whatever this was. Clearly, Izzy was only interested in physical gratification from him. He was surprised to find himself a bit disappointed in that. But still, it couldn't go on like this. He was still one of the captains of this ship, and he needed Izzy to at least meet him halfway. In fact, it seemed like Izzy only responded positively at all to him when he made a direct order. Oh. Well, that was interesting. Izzy, Steed repeated, voice louder and more stern. Take care of the ropes. I won't ask you a second time. Izzy turned to face him fully, and there was only a second of hesitation before he nodded at Steed. Yes, Captain. He stopped whatever he had been working on and crossed the deck to finish coiling the ropes on his own. Steed stepped back and watched him with an approving nod. This was not a tactic Steed ever imagined he'd be comfortable taking up, but it had been most effective, and the way Izzy had reacted so quickly and obediently was... Steed excused himself to the crew and hurried below deck to hide the sudden obvious tightness in his pants. Over the course of the next week, Steed studied Izzy's behavior, testing what wording would get him the quickest result and how forceful he actually had to be in order to get the results he wanted. Every time he was successful, he ended up sneaking off to his room to take care of the sexual tension he'd built up inside. If Ed noticed that days when Steed and Izzy worked amicably together were the days that Steed was a little more rowdy in bed, he certainly didn't comment on it. Steed, however, noticed the way Izzy's eyes darkened every time he gave him a direct order. One afternoon, after having watched him begrudgingly teach the Swede about proper cannon maintenance, Steed took a deep breath and approached the older man. Izzy, I'd like you to come assist me with something in my room, if you'd be so kind. Izzy's lip curled. Well, I'd rather be plucking my own eyelids off than doing this. It falls high on my list of desired activities than spending time alone with you, Bonnet. The last word was delivered as a curse. Steed smirked, just as he suspected. In the captain's quarters this moment, Mr. Hans. That is a direct order. He turned on his heel and strode away, not waiting to see or hear a response from his first mate. He entered his cabin and left the door open, breath slightly quickening when he heard Izzy enter behind him and shut it. I don't know what the hell you think you're playing at, but would you be so kind as to kneel in front of me, Mr. Hans? Steve didn't turn around. Have you lost your fucking mind? Do you realize the brand of idiots you've cultivated that are supposed to be keeping the ship afloat? Steve turned at that, but didn't approach him. Kneel. Don't make me repeat myself. Izzy's face went through a string of conflicted twitches. His desire to obey orders battling his disdain for Steed in real time before he silently stepped forward and sank to his knees in front of his captain. He didn't look up at him, his face already starting to flush pink at the position he was finding himself in, and the way his cock was already far more interested than he was. "Good boy," Steed cooed at him, running his fingers through Izzy's hair. "Isn't it better when you decide to play nice? Now, I've been watching you mouth off to my crew all day, and I think the best thing for you is to keep that mouth occupied for a bit with something more pleasant, don't you?" Izzy's eyes snapped up to meet Steed's. "I hope you're not implying that your cock is something pleasant." Even as he said the words, he let his eyes fall back to Steed's crotch and felt his mouth water slightly. "Open my trousers." The back and forth of the conversation and the true power he obviously held in his words was making Steed dizzy with desire. Izzy lifted his hands and fumbled, trying to be fast enough, trying to please his captain. Steed supposed somewhere in the back of his brain that this was wrong. This wasn't proper. This was taking advantage of a crew member. Then Izzy released his cock from the fabrics and nuzzled it, showing an impressive eagerness that drove any doubt from Steed's mind. "Did I say you could touch?" Izzy leaned back immediately and let out a disappointed whine that he was unable to stifle. He'd sucked Steed's cock countless times, but never this way. Never as commander and subordinate. Steed swallowed, trying to keep his composure and avoid grabbing Izzy's head and fucking his mouth right then. "Suck." Izzy leaned forward again, quick as lightning, and swallowed Steed down to the root. "And Izzy?" He looked up at Steed, pupils black and eyes wide with fear of being told to stop. "Make it good for you, Captain." Izzy groaned against Steed's sensitive skin and started to move. He hollowed his cheeks and took Steed into his throat again and again, foaming his tongue to the underside of Steed's erection each time he pulled back. He was a man on a mission, and Izzy was nothing if not stellar at obeying orders. Steed grabbed onto Izzy's shoulders, steadying himself each time his knees threatened to give out when Izzy moved his tongue a certain way. The idea of lasting more than a few minutes of this was laughable. Even so, Steed gave him no warning when he hit the edge and shot thick and hot into Izzy's mouth. He pumped his hips forward a few times, getting every bit out, before he pulled back and away. He took a long, shaky breath, then looked down into Izzy's eyes. The man was staring up at him, panting, waiting for a new order, unable to continue without guidance on what was permitted. "Tuck me back into my trousers, Izzy. I have work to get done after all." A flash of disappointment crossed Izzy's face, but he did as told. Steed patted his cheek, then turned and crossed the room to sit at his desk. If it was just an excuse to get off his feet finally, Izzy didn't need to know that. "That'll be all, Mr. Hands. You may go. Do take a moment to yourself in your quarters before returning to the deck." Izzy stood unsteadily and straightened his hair, putting on the mask he wore in front of the crew before walking toward the door. He was so hard in his leathers that walking was painful, but he didn't have far to go to make it to his room. "And Izzy?" Izzy froze, turning back to Steed. "Yes, Captain?" "Make sure you're thinking of me while you fuck your hand." There was a dramatic pause because Steed was nothing if not theatrical. "Dismissed." Izzy made it back to his room in record time.
That was So Sweet When You Obey by Spooky Scary Genderfuck, read by Bel C. If you enjoyed these fics, definitely head to the links in the show notes and give these authors and narrator a comment and a kudos. And you are always welcome to submit your own narrations to the show anytime. Just ask a fanfic author for permission, record an audio file, then send it to ourflagmeansfanfiction@gmail.com. Our next Gay Pirate News Hour live show is Saturday, May 3rd, so definitely subscribe to our YouTube so you can get notifications whenever we go live. And follow us on Instagram at ourflagmeansfanfiction, all one word. Until next time, do creations, be cringe, commit crime. Bye!